Good.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I am Marilyn London, and I am membership chairman and board member of the Friends of the Stirling Road Library. I want to give a special welcome to all of the friends of the library, because I want you to know that it's because of your support that we are really able to have lectures as fabulous as Shelly. So we totally appreciate all of your support. And for anybody who is a guest here tonight, we welcome you as well. And we ask you, encourage you to become a friend. And please check us out at www.stirlingfriends.org. And you could become a member. It's starting at $10 a year to have access to all these fabulous programs. We are the best bargain in town. And when you go onto the site, you will see all of the programs listed. The flyers are self-explanatory and they are excellent. So friend or guest, check out the website. It's really quite wonderful the way it's evolved. There's only one program that I would like to bring to your attention, and that is we would like you to mark your calendars for Tuesday, October 5th at 6:30, because that is the day of our annual meeting. And this year we will have several politicians who are joining us. There will be State Representative Jenny, Mayor Levy, and City Commissioner Gruber will all be joining us, as well as some officials from the library, Broward County Library Department. So we will also have an excellent speaker, Dr. Marjorie Marcus, whose topic is books that have been banned and burned in America. And I think we will really be surprised to see in the past which books have been banned and burned. And I'm sure that bringing it up to date, we'll all have read all of them, but it will be interesting to see what happened to that. And that's what she will be speaking about. So on the 5th, the meeting will take place at 6:30 and the speaker will be there at 7. So please support us and join us. It's now my pleasure to introduce our lecturer, Shelly Isaacs. And I believe you have all read his bio, his impressive bio in the newsletter. And those attending the introductory film in August, once in a lifetime, now really know, if you didn't know beforehand, why he is considered the Tri-County expert critic on foreign films. After much persistence, we were thrilled that he was able to join us, and we are so happy that he's putting together this great program of movies for you. Tonight's movie, A Fortunate Man, is a movie that I think is an excellent, excellent choice. I loved it, and I think you're all in for a huge treat. So I'm going to ask you, each of you, please make sure you are on mute. Use the chat for any comments or questions, but at the end, we will have time for Q&A. So if you're in a rush, you could put it in there. If not, you could wait. And without further ado, Shelly, it's all yours.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. It's nice to see a lot of names and pictures. By the way, Happy New Year. Happy New Year, and a healthy one, and one filled with a lot of good film this year, either in person or on Zoom. Anyway, to get to tonight's film, A Fortunate Man, it's interesting. The Danish title of the film, by the way, is Lykke Per. Lykke Per. It doesn't mean lick a pear. It's Lykke is spelled Lykke, pear, which means lucky pear, lucky pear, or lucky Peter, as it is. And what's interesting about it, and when I get into it a little more, is titles are great, because sometimes they say what the film is about, or sometimes they're a total contradiction in terms. And this one is certainly a contradiction when we look at it. When we look at a fortune, whether he's called a fortunate man or a lucky man, I think by the end of the film, one has to ask the question, lucky pair or lucky Jacoba or lucky Jacoba. And if you've seen the film, you'll know what I mean. Anyway, it is based on a novel, which, believe it or not, was written in 1905, 1904, 1905. The novel's author his name was Henrik Pontoppidan. Henrik Pontoppidan. He was Danish. And for this novel and two others that he wrote in succession, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1917. In 1917. He lived through the latter part of the 19th century and well into the 20th century. Died in 1947, I believe. So he saw a number of things which were sort of envisioned in the story come to life, come to being. Streets filled with electricity, if you remember what Pear talks about. Anyway, the film was directed by one of Denmark's great directors, but also by one of the great directors in world cinema. His name is Billy August. And if you remember a film with Max von Sydow some years ago called Pele the Conqueror, which won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film back in the 80s, I think it was 89, I'm not sure, but he won the Academy Award for that film. And this film, he wrote, interestingly enough, with his son. They collaborated on the screenplay, adapting the novel and changing the novel somewhat. And I will be talking about the novel at the same time I talk about the film. Now, the novel itself was considered a modern breakthrough in literature. The modern breakthrough, especially in Danish literature throughout Europe, it was called the modern breakthrough. It was a movement of naturalism in literature. It was the first time that books were really dealing with naturalism or realism in many ways, replacing the romanticism that was still in place until towards the end of the 19th century. And it applied mainly to Scandinavian literature, which experienced this breakthrough from the rest of Europe. The authors of this movement revolted against traditional culture, themes, adopting a more realistic approach, incorporating liberal views of sexuality and religion, along with an interest in scientific breakthroughs, such as Darwin's theory of evolution, such as engineering. And we saw a lot of this in the film, and it was lifted from the novel. Among the most prominent authors during this breakthrough were, of course, Strindberg, Ibsen, and Henrik Pontoppidan. They were considered the forefront. Now, as well as winning the Nobel Prize in 1917, he was awarded many other honors around the world. But the book itself is considered one of the 100 best works of modern literature. If you ever want to delve into the novel itself, is considered part of the canon of modern literature. In fact, it is still taught in Danish schools today. It has been taught since it came out, and it still hasn't faded from Danish memory, so to speak. But it's in a broad description. It really carries over the traditions set by French literature, Balzac and Zola being among two great authors that did this kind of work. And it centers on a hero, in this case, Peter Andreas Sidenius, and he paints a picture of Denmark in the era of the constitutional, what was known as the constitutional struggle between conservatives and liberals, the rise of industrialization, cultural conflict, and the awakening of revolutionary movements, not just in Denmark, but would also be reverberate around the world. That's what makes the film relevant in many ways, is that we can certainly relate to many of the things that happen inside the story. For Lucky Pair, his most celebrated novel, the one especially cited for his Nobel Prize, he was he himself, Henrik Pontoppidan, was a Jutland Viker's son who traveled to Copenhagen to train as an engineer before becoming an author. So in essence, yes, some of the novel, some of this story is autobiographical. And the book itself had been translated into 11 languages, I started to say, and it wasn't released in this country until 2010, believe it or not. So it's available now. It is a cosmopolitan masterpiece of what I call epochal sweep. It is epic sweep, profound social, psychological, and metaphysical anatomy of the modernist tradition. It has been named, critics love this film as well as the novel. Everything about Pear has the look of success. He has brilliance. He is a prototype of the active man of the 20th century. He is what should be becoming the modern man. And the rich heiress who almost marries him agrees when she tells her he feels like a mountain troll from a fairy tale. Her sister, on meeting him, noticed his shoes. Remember at the beginning when Nanny notices his shoes. Both the novel and the film explore the rise and fall of this man and how they all impact on his life. And it deals with guilt, faith, pride, and whether one can truly escape the constraints of their social heritage, which really plays into the other major character in the film, Jacoba, because she is the one that really is the most transformative character in the whole story. But as brilliant as Pear thinks he is, the story's brilliance is that he is systematically subverted on the cusp of making every achievement, as if the hand of fate pulls him back from victory. Well, or as we always like to say, he's his own worst enemy. He's his own worst enemy. He's about to leave his mark on Danish society and history, and he pulls back. He hurts himself when he insults the minister, when he refuses to apologize. He's about to marry a wealthy heiress, but calls off the engagement. He returns to the country, starts a family with a modest girl, doesn't find happiness there, and retreats to spend his final years in isolation in a remote area of the North. The novel itself opens up a great deal more in terms of backstory. In the opening, in fact, in the novel, we learned that the Sidanius family traces his lineage back centuries. He comes from centuries of Vikers, of a religious family. And while his brothers and sisters mutter their prayers in a sort of underworld blindness to the light, full of dread of life and its glory, as Pear says, his was a singular rebellious life force. What the book tells us, so you get an idea of who he was before we even see him in the film, he would sneak out of the house and go sleigh riding with girls. He flirted with a local girl, and when a parishioner complained to his father that he had been stealing apples from his garden, the wayward son is severely admonished at family dinner, warned that he could end up like Cain, the first murderer, whom God cursed. You will be wandering a fugitive in all the earth. So essentially, this is what his father impressed on him. And at the opening of the film, remember, his father says to him, I don't agree with what you're doing. And he offers him the watch, that watch, which will reappear many times during the film. And he refuses to accept it. And he curses his father at the same time. So we combine fable and allegory in this film. The story's guiding theme is that of the homelessness of its hero, or as he calls it, the rootlessness he experiences, condemned to spend his life in a lonely quest for a metaphysical safe harbor. He doesn't realize what he's doing. He seems apathetic. You notice it isn't until the end of the film that he even sheds a tear. So his curse can be seen as a religious one, or is it a fairy tale curse? What is truly the difference between the two when we think about it? This has fable-like character to it, but it also is based on religion, or the negative side of religion in the film, except when it comes to the modern world and a modern religion that we see in the film, Judaism. And I will get into that in a moment. But when he's immediately thrust into the modern world, who is the first one he takes up with? A waitress. Remember Elizabeth, the waitress. She feeds him. He has a way of getting food. And he expresses his own ideas in class. When he expresses his ideas in the classroom, remember he's going to school, he's reprimanded for thinking outside the box. Don't be an individual. You're here to learn. You're not here to express your ideas. So right away, we see where his rebellion is going to come from. He says, young man, you're here to gain knowledge. That's it. That's it. His upbringing becomes his downfall. No matter how hard he tries to reject his past, his eventual failures lead him to embrace it, lead him to embrace his past. We are also exposed, and here's where we come into a major part of the story, to the Jewish world of Copenhagen in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And it was a major force. There were a number of wealthy families in Denmark who would impact on the country. And through the Solomons, and especially Jacoba, who is an intellectual, having learned 6 languages, as some other points out, and achieved a degree in history and literature, unheard of for women at that point in time. She is truly the epitome of the free thinker. She is the free thinker of this age. As her father explains to Ibert, he tells her, be careful what you wish for if you're wishing for my daughter, in terms of Ibert, the man who's chasing her at the beginning. His meeting with Ivan, Pear's meeting with Ivan, it gains him his entry into the family. It is Ivan who calls him first a fortunate man, but then it is Uncle Delft. I love Uncle Delft, the character of the uncle in the film. He's wonderful. He's an observer, and he keeps looking at Pear, and he says to him, you know what they say, fortune favors fools. Fortune favors fools, be careful. Soon after that, he spots Jacoba in the restaurant with Ibert, not yet aware she's a Solomon. Then at the Christmas dinner with Elizabeth, he reveals at Elizabeth's table, he reveals his ambition for putting her down, telling her she'll never be rich. He doesn't want to deal with poverty-stricken people. He wants to come into the upper world. He lies his way into a new suit of clothes. If you remember the scene where he buys the suit, and he attends the dinner with Ivan and his family, becoming seduced by their world, as well as attracted to Nanny, the younger daughter. He becomes drunk both literally and metaphorically. And upon learning that Jacoba will inherit the most, his attention is drawn away from Nanny, especially when Jacoba speaks about the future and how technology and faith can be tied together for the good of mankind. If you remember the conversation when Ibert says to him, you're the son of a Vicar, yet you're an engineer. How does that work? Why religion and science? And Jacoba is the one to answer and says they both can be put forward to good use. And Uncle Delft is interesting, as I said, in his appearance and how he sees through Pear. He realizes his ambitions from the beginning. Remember, he says to him, when he sets his eyes on Jacoba, he says, I see you've switched paths here. You seem interested in the older sister. And he looks at him. He knew what was going on. And despite the fact that the family finds him immature and boorish and scatterbrained, Jacoba remarks, she said, yes, but it's the poor. Being brought up poor leaves terrible scars on a person, which will reverberate later in the film when she does what she decides to do towards the end of the film. She is the voice of social life. She is the voice of humanity in this film. His meeting with the engineer colonel proves pivotal because his arrogance gets the best of him. Although we realize as well as he does that the colonel is jealous of this youthful man and really wants to take the project for himself. I mean, we understand that. And we can understand his being angry, but not at the fact that he's letting it get in the way of creating this thing. But it's here that Sidanius makes his first encounter with the past. His brother Eberhard, who tries to bring him back into the fold, only to bear Pear's resentment. Remember, he lets him have it in the apartment. He said, you did this to me. They did this to me, and I will never come back. And this is contrasted. You know, it's interesting. We see all this happening, and yet we see that Jacoba, we see the first scene when Pear dismisses his father and leaves. We contrast that with Jacoba and how she addresses her father. She is a free thinker. He lets her speak her mind. He wants her to go out into the world. We see again the differences in the religions here and how they play a part in life. And in the novel, Pontoppidan brings it up a great deal. He also was taken in by the Jews of Denmark and well respected, especially when he started writing. And he therefore reflected that in the novel. As I said, it is somewhat semi-autobiographical, and he reflects the fact that they were the most charitable at that period in time. They also spread a great deal of influence because of their money. They wanted to use their money for good. But this is, you know, she burns in the book. She burns at the living center of the book. She is the heart of the book. She's on fire in this novel, okay? And ultimately in the film. Pontoppidan endowed her, and so does Billy August, with extraordinary intellectual restlessness. And even as Mrs. Solomon observes that Pear seems rootless, questioning how they might not be suited for each other, Jacoba tries to defend her choice, forcing her mother to relent. And her father goes along with it as well. If you remember the announcement of their engagement, he said, you constantly argue with me. You're a determined young man. And that's not necessarily a good trait. He said, but I give you the credit for it. It's interesting. And we see anti-Semitism in this story rear its ugly head, which it did at that period of time, which it does every period of time, it seems, when she goes to meet his brother. Remember, she goes to tell his brother, and we see the men downstairs, and he says, yeah, I could see it. She's a Jewess, a Jewish tart, he refers to as. And the brother also, when she asks about telling him that we intend to probably marry, she said, you're probably against it. And he goes, yeah, you're absolutely right. He will hear no word of it. And then we see it later on in the story. But it began, that scene when she goes to visit the brother, she also sees children in the street. When she goes to Pear's apartment, she sees these poverty-stricken children in the street, and she looks at them, and you could see the look on her face, the look of concern, which again will come back to us later in the story. And he even says, the brother even says that his family rejects happiness as a state of mind. They can't be happy, which in essence can Pear be happy. And even though he becomes self-absorbed when he goes to Austria, Pear doesn't answer her letters. Remember, she's writing these beautiful letters to him and he doesn't answer. And he learns of his father's death and he's not even interested. And he becomes even more surprised by the fact that she comes to him. He does not know how to experience love. He cannot feel love, let alone give love. He can't feel it. He can't incorporate it into his system. And she reads him that letter. Remember, she said, I was at your apartment and I wanted to take something with me of you, something of you. And she reads the letter and he realizes his contradictions, his desire to achieve despite his background. And yet it becomes the defining moment for her and her desire to help the poor and downtrodden, as she says, to breathe clean air and enjoy the light. And it is in Austria that we witness his conflict with faith. Remember, he sees the little statue of Jesus and he spits on it and he destroys it. And it is with that scene that we can see how Billy August, the director of the film, reinterpreted the same scene from the book. Because in the book, he turns his back to the hillside shrine. He looks at the pale man standing there. These are Pontoppidan's words. He says, why don't we have the courage to spit from disgust right in his face? Pear takes out his revolver. He has a gun, which we didn't see in the film, and fires at the image of Jesus while yelling, now I shoot in the new century. As the cross splinters, a hollow boom sounds through the valley. Like infernal thunder, Pear blanches and then laughs hysterically, remembering the signposts he had seen earlier. Take notice of the echo. Take notice of the echo. Billy August reinterprets the scene with the bells on the church that he can't get out of his head. It's the religion constantly sneaking back up on him that he tries to rid himself of. And then a little later, when his mother visits him after the engagement announcement, she lays on the guilt with the watch. She wants and tells him the story of how the father left his father, never saying goodbye. And when he saw the watch in his suitcase, he ran back overnight against all adversity and hugged his father and apologized. He has that bust made of himself in Austria, Pear. Talk about ego, talk about vanity. And it all comes down to his refusal to apologize that destroys any chance of his seeing his project become a reality when he comes back from Austria. Thus begins his downfall. That is really the moment of his downfall when he refuses to apologize. And Mr. Solomon and the group say, that's it, we're finished. We have no more to say. He now will confront his mother's death. Reading her letter, he is overcome with guilt. He goes back for the funeral. He doesn't tell anybody. He decides to go to the funeral, and there he has another crisis of conscience. He meets Inga, the Reverend's daughter. He confesses to the Reverend about his doubts of faith, and the Reverend says to him, you have to deal with this yourself. Heaven prides humility, but you have to find this in yourself. He wants to be blessed. He apologizes to everybody at that point. And yet he goes and he will reject Jacoba. He will reject Jacoba. He goes back and he tells her, this was all a mistake. I never should have led you on. And he sits there stone-faced as she breaks down. And we know she's pregnant at this point. We know she's carrying his child. And when she knew she was pregnant, she was delighted. She couldn't wait to tell him that they would be making a family. And he tells her in the restaurant, this is not going to be, and dismisses her and walks off. And she's left there bereft, crying. He has no remorse whatsoever. He's a man incapable of love, unable to feel happiness, trapped by his past. And that's his own worst enemy. And as Delft says to him, when he's finally lost all his money, nobody wants to loan him money, and he sees Delft on the street when he's standing downstairs after Jacoba's gone for the abortion. Again, another modern thing approached in the novel. Her family believes in it. The mother says, go, take care of it. She gives her the money. I know a good doctor. I know a good, they're not going to do it on the back street. And she goes off and she's not even there. And he says, could you tell Jacoba to come down? He's desperate. He's desperate. And Delft said to him at that point, he said, pride goeth before the fall. Pride goeth before the fall. And that's, he walks off. And now we move into another chapter of his life, as well as Jacoba's. He marries, we see he's married Inga after seducing her the same way he seduced Jacoba. He uses the same words. Remember, the words come back. You want to be mine, don't you? You want to be mine. Not I want to be yours. Not let's be together. You want to be mine. He said that to Jacoba. You want to be mine on the steps of the house. She mistook his behavior for a demonstration of love when he ran all the way back to the house, when the way he came on to her, all of these things she mistook for love, and it wasn't. And then now we see him later on. He's got a family. He's got 3 children, and he tries to force an apology from his son. He's acting not just like his father. He's acting like the colonel who told him, I want an apology. He's demanding an apology from his son, not treating him like a child. And he realizes he can't make it as a father. And he tells Inga, I have to be alone. He's realizing he cannot operate in society. He cannot operate within society. He's failed at every turn because he cannot relate to people. He cannot relate to people. And at this point in the story, it shifts to Jacoba, once again experiencing anti-Semitism when she walks into the YWCA courtyard and she sees the poor children. And she asks one woman, can I help? And she says, yes, you can feed them bread. And another one comes over and says, you're not welcome here. This is not of your faith. And Jacoba says, I understand. And yet she prominently walks proudly through the film with her Star of David exposed. This is a society within which, for the most part, she can. It's interesting. And that comes from the novel. They bore their pride. They bore their pride in Judaism and everything else. I mean, you saw that temple. That was a real temple in Denmark, by the way, that dates back to the 19th century. We see her now determined that she says to her parents, I want to open a school for underprivileged children. She no longer wishes to marry, and she wants to break the notion of social inheritance. Break the notion of social inheritance so that the scars of poverty will not affect children as they grow up. I love it the way she knocks at the public schools. She said the police, they persecute poor children. They send them to institutions. They arrest them. They can't deal with them. And now she is going to reverse that. And finally, when we reach the end of the story, it's fabulous. He's living alone. He's isolated from the rest of the world. He's where he wants to be, essentially, in a remote area of the North Country. But we saw he's kept up with what Jacoba was doing. He knew what was going on out there. And finally sends her a letter, beckons her to come. And come she does. She goes to visit him. And she's kind to him. She's kind to him. He's dying of cancer. In the book, same thing. He's dying of cancer the same way his father did. And he tells her, would you take my plans and my models and show them in your school? And she said, of course. She said, it's a perfect way for children to see, to inspire children of what they can do in this world. And I love it, though, when she says to him how much she loves what she's doing. In a sense, she realized her calling in life, and that all these children are their children. All these children are their children. And it was beautiful the way she says that. And she says, I regret nothing. I am glad we did have each other, for the bad and for the good. It was a life experience that put her on the path she wound up on. So she did not regret it. She had no regrets. Unlucky pair, lucky Jacoba. Unfortunate pair, an unfortunate man, a fortunate woman. That's the real title. That's the hidden title of the story. Yet the novel goes a little further, by the way. Following his death, they discover a notebook, and it contains these words of fatalism and rebellion. The novel closes this way and gives us a certain amount of closure as well. When we are young, these are his words, we make immoderate demands on those powers that steer existence. We want them to reveal themselves to us. The mysterious veil which we have to live under which we have to live offends us. We demand to be able to control and correct the great world's machinery. When we get older, our impatience, we cast our eye over mankind and its history to try and find at last a coherence of law in progressive development. In short, we seek a meaning to life, an aim for our struggles and suffering. But one day we are stopped by a voice from the depths of our being, a ghostly voice that asks, "Who are you?" From then on, we hear no other question. From that moment, our own true self becomes the great Sphinx, whose riddle we try to solve. Honor to my youth's expansive dreams, and I am still a world conqueror, as Ivan called him. Every man's soul is an independent universe. His death, the extinction of the universe in miniature. And finally, to summarize both the novel and the film, in 2019, there was a New Yorker essay entitled "A Neglected Modern Masterpiece and Its Perverse Hero." The book critic, literature critic James Wood, who writes for New Yorker, summed up an essay on the book. He says, "What if Pear's final renunciation is a narrative false flag? Instead of looking at Pear, we should perhaps look toward Jacoba, whose own renunciation takes her into the world, not away from it, and who seems to manage this turn without compromising her defiant secularism. She is the novel's true hero. How do you get back to Eden? Back to the place you inhabited before the original religious curse. Back to a home before religion made it a home you could be exiled from. Before religion made it a home you could be exiled from. If you are a wandering homeless Christian, scarred by original sin, the answer might be in the arms of a wandering Jew, but one whose own itinerancy is unseduced by the lure of religion, whose own secularism is not tempted by the simplicity of religious masochism. In the strange switchback of their lives, Pear and Jacoba each redefined the meaning of luck. The shame was that they could not share it. Lucky Jacoba, unlucky Pear. And I think that sums up the film as well as the novel. It really explains it all for us. So I hope you all enjoyed the film and this little recap. And now if you have any questions, I would love you could put them in the chat. I'll be glad to respond, or you can raise your hand. If I see it, I'll also be glad to respond. If anybody wants to chime in on their feelings about the film, nobody, anybody? There's a little yellow hand you have where you can respond, by the way. I think it's where, is it where mute is? No, but it's somewhere in there. Anybody? You can also call out and say, I have a comment.
I have a question. Shelly,
Great.
I have a question. I particularly like the actress who played Jacoba. I thought she was fat. She just was the one I totally remembered, even though I saw it a long time ago. What, do you know anything about her as an actress?
Yes, she's young. She's now about 34.
Oh,
She has become a prominent actress in Denmark. Her name is, oh God, I forget her first name. Her last name is Rosenthal.
Catherine Katrina.
Rosenthal, Beals Rosenthal. And she is coming out in a new film that opened in Denmark this year, which is being released in the United States soon, I think right after the first of the year. And it's called The Taste of Hunger, A Taste of Hunger. And it might even be their submission to the Academy Awards. She stars in the film and she gives another great performance. She stars opposite one of Denmark's great actors, as a matter of fact. So that should be an interesting film because it's also about the restaurant business. So it'll be a great attraction about food and chefs and restaurants and fame. It's also about a man seeking paying the price of fame, interestingly enough.
You know when
So
that's coming here?
No, it's from what I'm getting from the distributor, it's coming soon. They have coming soon. So as soon as it's available, I will probably jump on it for showing somewhere. So
What's the name of it again?
A Taste of Hunger, or Taste of Hunger.
Okay.
Shelly?
Yes, Linda. Yeah, and I'll get around to everybody. Linda, I saw your hand.
I really enjoyed the movie, but I have a question. What do you think stopped this wonderfully acclaimed book from being filmed just recently?
It's a good question because it hadn't really been known outside of Europe. It hadn't been known outside of Europe. And for some reason, even though it's taught in Europe, it didn't have circulation here. In 2010, it was finally picked up in England and the United States.
What?
So I think Billy August, the director, who does a lot of work with historical, he does a lot of, he's one of the foremost interpreters of Ingmar Bergman's work.
So it's angled, so you
I
can't.
don't know where that's coming
It's got
from.
Wendy Rothfield.
Please, don't talk. Probably doesn't know.
Oh,
Okay, so anyway, Linda, I'm sorry. It just, he probably wanted to do it for some years and finally got financing for it. That's what happened, is basically, you know, it takes time to get financing. It could have been gestating for some years. But I'm glad you asked me the question, because one of the things that the director wanted to transfer into the film and why he found it relevant, this is what inspired him to do the film. So now you'll know why it was now that it got done, was he saw Pear as being representative of today's selfie generation, locked into their phones. They're isolated. They can't deal with everybody. They make demands. It's their way or the highway. And it's, you know, Instagram and what they do and how people react to it. He felt he was really a modern man. He was this type of person. So that was part of the inspiration for the film.
Thank you.
You're
Shelley,
welcome. Yes.
would you please comment on Pear's contribution to Jacobi's institution of 12,600 kroner when he had 3 children left back at home that he sired? There seemed to be some dissonance there. in this dying man not contributing to the welfare of his children
Family.
and his family, but wanting to contribute a very noble thing to Jacoby's institution. What do you make of all
Absolutely.
that?
Okay. First of all, there's what we call an ellipsis in the film, which is really time itself. A lot of time had passed. You know, he had the beard, Jacob had gray hair, a number of years. In the book, I think it was over 10 years had passed since he had isolated himself. And if you remember, he really set it up for his wife and 3 children to be taken care of. There was the man he built the windmill for, and he invited him over. He invited him in. He brought the birthday gift for the son. So in the novel, you find out that she went with that man and she was very well taken care of. So it's an ellipsis in the film that we don't know about. And the money that he accumulated was during that 10 years of his isolation. He had cut himself off from the world. So it wasn't even thinking, he didn't even think of those children as his anymore. They belonged to another man. He couldn't relate to them. You saw how he couldn't relate to his son. And he couldn't relate to them, and that's why he pulled himself away. So essentially, he made sure his wife would have what she needed, and she really got a better lot in life than she did with him. He was wealthy, and so everybody had moved on by that point, and that's why he left it to Jacoba. What he found in that 10 years of isolation in the book is that she was his one true love. He really did love her. He really did realize why he loved her in the first place, which is when she was sitting at that table and she talked about the future. And it's interesting because, you know, Per as a character also was a visionary. He was a visionary. He saw the future. But he couldn't focus on the fact of what he was doing. He thought it could only be his way and no other way. Which is not really the way to go, But that's why he left the money to Jacoba's school. Okay, Dredja.
Yes. Shelly, could you say something about him hanging the watch on his father's grave?
Yeah, well, the watch was, you know, originally the gift. I call that the sort of I have a saying. It's called Chekhov's law. If you're all familiar with Chekhov made a great statement once. He had gone to see a play, and in the play there was a rifle on the wall of the drawing room, and he kept focusing on the rifle. It was very prominent on the wall, and he was waiting for the third act. Nothing happened with the rifle. And he said, listen, if you're going to show me a gun in the first act, it better go off in the third act. Okay. And in essence, I call that Chekhov's law. It doesn't have to be a gun. It has to be a symbol of something. And the watch was a symbol, number one, of the Sedanius family. It had been handed down. Mm-hmm. And it was also a piece of his father that he was giving him. This was mine. In other words, he would be completely attached to his father if he took the watch at the beginning. And then finally, when his mother gives it to him, he doesn't, you know, also doesn't want it. And it winds up back in his hands anyway, because his brother winds up giving it to him with the letter. It's like he can't get rid of it. It keeps coming back to him. And finally, in the end, he hangs it on his father's grave because he's renouncing everything. He's renouncing his material life, and he's renouncing his religious past. He's renouncing it all. And that's why he puts it there. It's yours. I don't want it. I don't want a piece of it, because it was still hanging in the room. If you noticed where he was working in the house, it was hanging on the wall. And it was a constant reminder to him of who he was. And he decides, no more. I don't want it anymore. But it was a renunciation. It was, in a sense, a renunciation symbol. The gun went off. You're gone. You're gone.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Paul,
Shelley, there was a chat
Oh.
from somebody in the question, and it
oh,
said,
okay.
as you mentioned, that Solomon family was very modern for the time period. Did the family express any regrets when Jacobo was to marry a non-Jewish man?
No, because they were, even though they were practicing Jews, they were very secular in society. And they felt that in the book, and also Pontoppidan explains it in his writings, he talked about the fact that, and if you read the essay, is that Jewish society was very secular and they wanted to assimilate. So they would accept a marriage. They would accept a marriage outside the faith. They would accept it. Maybe not willingly, but they also didn't want to lose their daughter. Sometimes the very religious would say, "You're dead to me." Essentially what they told her about him. If he married her, he's gone. So, but yet this was a secular family and they were very open. I mean, even Uncle Delft understood. They want to be part of society. They want to be a major part of society, and this would be one of the only ways they could accomplish it. This would give them more acceptance in the world, so to speak. So that would do
Paul
it.
has a question. Paul, do you have a question?
Yeah, Paul. Wait, Paul, and then Barbara. Okay, Paul. Paul Kraft.
This was really enjoyable, the film too. And you had mentioned the number of times, the number of points in his life in the film where he really could have become happy and become great and did not. And there was one that I noticed also that was particularly poignant for me. It's clear that the church is portrayed as a villain in this film in many, many ways, but in one of the more subtle ways, although to me not so subtle, was the point at which he was really confessing to the clergyman, and was,
Right.
I think, at that point receptive to actually hearing something which could have changed his life, which could have turned the direction of his life. And of course, I realized that that's not the intention of the book or the movie, that it was a tragic movie. But that clergyman could have, instead of walking away, engaged him in the process of healing. And did not. And I'm wondering if you think that was a statement on the church in general.
I think that what was happening was when he did confess to him, he said, "Go, deal with yourself." I think that we have to accept that over time, while he was living there and raising the family, there were conversations. And whether or not he was accepting it, we don't know. It was a conflict. The Reverend knew this was a conflict. He attended church. We saw him at church with his family. So he was not capable, though. He was in constant conflict. We knew that from the beginning. He was in constant conflict. And I think he was trying it on when he confessed. He was trying it on because he couldn't find himself. And he was hoping, okay, maybe this is the way, which ultimately it wasn't. Now, Pontoppidan, I mentioned at the beginning, when he wrote this novel in 1905, Denmark was undergoing a constitutional crisis. It was also undergoing a religious crisis because the church was beginning to fade at that point. There was a conflict between modernism and tradition that was going on. Copenhagen was coming into the modern world. Denmark was coming into the modern world. So you had all of these, and there was an industrial conflict. So you had all of this. There was liberal democracy was taking hold, and a revolution, and the awakening revolutionary movements. Now, if you remember, 1905 was the first time that there was there were communist uprisings in Russia. As was ultimately said, there's a famous quote: 1905 was just the rehearsal. And 1917 was the first act. So we get that feeling, and that's what he's trying to relate here, is in essence that yes, the church was somewhat malevolent because it refused to bend with the times, whereas Judaism was bending with the times as a faith. The Jews were trying to assimilate into the society. They had been there for a while. It's not that Copenhagen's Jews arrived as immigrants. There were generations of them there. So you had all of this historically going on. And I think what he was aiming at in the book was to show that he in essence was basically irredeemable because he was not happy. He could not be happy. He could not reconcile happiness because of the scars of his upbringing. And that's what Jacobo was fighting against. And that's ultimately what forced him to isolate himself in the end. So, okay. Anything else, Paul?
Well, since you've asked, I have seen the results of people who seem to be unreachable, who have reached a point in their life where they see something that could potentially change their life. And in the right circumstances, lives can change at that point. And I think that was a missed opportunity. And maybe he was pointing that out as one more of those missed opportunities to actually create a life, a happy life.
To find the redemption. Yes, it was one more of them, but it was also, 1904, 1903. He by all rights, he could have found a psychiatrist, which he wasn't going to find. There was no mental health for him to go to outside of the church. Outside of the church, there was psychiatry, but it was not popular for someone like him, who came from the sticks and having this conflict. And the clergyman certainly wasn't going to say, "Listen, I think you should see a psychiatrist." So I think we have to look culturally at the time. And yes, you're right in one aspect that it was just another failed opportunity. But he also, had to take off the mask. He had to become who he was, and he can only become that in isolation. Which suggests that there may have been some mental problems with him. If we look at today, we would say we have to clear up your health. It's a problem with his health, with his mental health. So, okay. Barbara.
I just wanted to share my reaction to the film. It was said a fortunate man, and he started out, full of such great ideas and so promising. And when I realized that it was going south, I had to turn the movie off, and I didn't come back to it to the next day. I was just so upset that you could see the trajectory that it just, I had to leave.
Well, I understand, but see, and then if you stay with it, you see the trajectory that Jacob is on.
I did. I went back to it, but it was so upsetting when I saw what was happening that I had to say I had to quit for a while.
Interesting. Yeah, it's you say to yourself, this guy is terrible. He's petulant. He's arrogant. He's his own worst enemy, as I said.
In his hands.
Exactly. And he just didn't know how to behave. He had if we looked at him today, we'd say he has no social skills. He didn't, because of where he came from, because he was a product, he was scarred. As Jacobus says it, he was scarred by his past, by the poverty and the religious upbringing, the strict religious upbringing. Marilyn, do I see your hand?
There was a question in the chat. Someone was said, unfortunately, Per was lacking the ability to feel love. Do you feel this has a genetic connection?
Not a genetic, well, no, I wouldn't say it was a genetic. Yeah, I wouldn't say it was a genetic connection. I would say it was a religious, in this case, his upbringing. He was constantly hit. Remember, he says to his father, "Dad, hit me again." It's what you usually do. It's what you usually do. He was a rebellious young man. He was a rebellious young man, and his father would slap him, would probably beat him. You know, and the kids, we saw them having dinner in this room, and they were eating gruel basically. And the father prays, and then they just eat. They were passive. He grew up in a passive form, or the family, his siblings were all passive, yet he would sneak out of the house. As I said, when you understand what happens in the novel, you understand his behavior. You know, everybody usually in film, I go by a great director once said, Jean Gabin, is the true hell in a film is that everybody has their reasons. Everybody has their reasons, and we have to look at the reasons. And his reasons were ambition. You know, his reasons were to break away from where he came from. Once he saw the world, you know, once they see Paris, you can't keep them down on the farm. He saw modern Copenhagen, and he said, I want this world. When he walks past the statue of Jesus in the street, he looks up at it and he said, what do you want? What do you really want? You really think you're going to change the world? You know, he saw himself as changing the world. In other words, each man has the ability to do this, but he didn't have the set of tools. He didn't have the social set of tools to work with. And you know, Paul, you're right. If he had the right person giving him the tools, he would have, you know, but yet people didn't understand him either. Jacoba mistook what he was doing for love. And she wanted to love him. And she wanted, remember, she said, is this the time you're going to say it? And he says, say what? And he playfully says it, you know, and she says, I love, he says, love you. You know, he's parroting her at that point up on the mountaintop before he makes love to her. But the fact was, she had to pull it out of him. She had to pull it out of him. He couldn't make the connections. He couldn't make the connections. Anybody else? Let me look in the chat. I know there were some other ones. I love the uncle and brother. Jack, you said, I struggled with the hero. Well, anti-hero in this case. I thought he was tiresome and petulant. Yes, he became so, even according to Barbara. Unfortunately, Pear was lacking. Yeah, that what I saw. He wanted his research project to be shared with the world. Yes, he did. Was he a misanthrope? In certain ways, he was. Yes, he was. He couldn't deal with people. I like the way the beginning, Patsy Mednick, I like the way the beginning and ending scene of the, yes, very good, Patsy, both with Pear and Field near the ocean. At the beginning, forward-looking and optimistic. At the end, the opposite. Yes, that's terrific. Filmically, that's great, is to understand that, is to see him at the beginning walking up that hill of grass, and he reads the letter, and we get a God's eye view. God smiling on Pear. God is smiling on Pear. In the end, he's staring off into the horizon. As we talk about in literature and film, he's looking to the heavens. Are you there? Are you there? Where is God? Where is God? So his search, you know, I always say, and again, another great director said it, every good story has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, but not necessarily in that order. So remember that when you watch a film. The beginning and the end are the same, Yes, yes, this was the beginnings. It's interesting. It began some 25 or 35 years before, but maybe in Denmark, the beginnings. Joni Shear shared this. The beginnings of Reform Judaism. Yes, it had been formed here in America, and there was a convention, in fact, Those of you who remember Robert Moses, who was the emperor of New York, so to speak, who built all the great roads. His mother was one of the founders of Reform Judaism in the United States. Anyway, but that's true. It was as if they were leaning in that direction, except this was conservative. You notice the women were sitting upstairs and the men were downstairs. Linda Hock, Jacobo was brought up with love. He was brought up by a family that didn't believe in love. They believed in a wrathful God, not a loving one. Yes, yes, certainly. And also, it's not meant to be happy. You'll be happy in the next life. The source of the last paragraph, the essay you quoted, it was excellent. Yes, it's from the New Yorker. It's a 2019 essay. It's entitled, I will give you the title. The title is A Neglected Modern Masterpiece and Its Perverse Hero. A Neglected Modern Masterpiece and Its Perverse Hero. And it's written by James Wood in a 2019 New Yorker essay. So you have that. Let's see, who's next here? Fern, can you share the source of the last? Yes, I just did. I'm sorry. Okay, Jerry Bain. I think in his vision for the future, he didn't just want to break away. I think he wanted to destroy his old world. Well, definitely he wanted to destroy his own old world. And yes, he wanted to. He does make a comment at one point when he's presenting his project to the men who will invest in it before he makes the faux pas of not apologizing. He said, this will end poverty. This will end poverty because we will be able to give energy to everybody. And energy is the source of power. And as the men who are investing in it say, not only is it the source of power, it is the source of money. It will be the source of more money. So I think, yes, he was wanting to destroy the old world and bring on the new. This is a novel of that conflict between the old and the new. It started in 1850s Germany. Yes, 1850s Germany and the United States around the same time. Great ideas take hold in different places at the same time. So anybody else have any comments, anything they want to say? I'm here for you. Just call out your name if you want, because there's so many of you, I can't see you all, and some of you are not on screen. No? Oh,
Right.
no.
What's the next movie, Shelley?
That you just anticipated me. I was ready to do
Little
that.
England.
Yes, it's Little England is the next film, and it's from Greece. It was a submission for the Academy Award. Wait a minute. Yeah, Little England. It is set on a starkly beautiful island of Andros. It is a film that begins in 1930. It is also an epic story. It evokes the passions of a seafaring society. These are all, this is an island where the men go off to sea. A seafaring society where women can wait a lifetime for men who may never return. Centering on this tumultuous relationship of an unbending mother with her two daughters. Now we tell story of two daughters over 20 years. We see their story. They become rivals in love. And in the wake of World War II, suppressed feelings will be rekindled. And the cruel games of fate reveal secrets leading to devastation. It's a monumental film. It is a drama and a melodrama rolled into one. It has great acting, beautiful locations, again, much like this one. Cinematography is great. And it is also based on a novel. All the films I've chosen for us through December are all based on books or plays, as you'll see, because why not? You're a library. So I think that it's important to show films that are based on books and how directors make them their own. You know, when a person says, I like the book better, it's not really, they're not the same animal. A book and a film are two different animals, and we have to look at them that way. We have to look at a film as a separate story, and the book as a separate story. Books, you can, elaborate a lot more than you can in a film. So I think we have to be, have that realization when we look at a film. So with that, I thank you all.
Thank you.
It's been terrific. I look forward to seeing you for our next film, Little England. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.